New smartphones are constantly introducing new features and gimmicks to convince you to buy them, but here are 3 of the most important things to consider when buying a new phone. Cameras are one of the most important features on a phone. Even if you don't take photos that often, it's worth considering because you'll probably regret it if you buy a phone with a really bad one. If you're mainly looking for a cheap phone, look for one with a minimum of 5 megapixels. It must also have an LED flash and support autofocus. This won't guarantee great photos, but you will avoid the worst ones out there. But what's the difference between cheap phone cameras and the best on the market? Here you can see photos from a cheap phone, a good mid-range one, and a flagship phone. You can instantly see the difference in this close-up of a wine bottle, as the cheap phone really struggles. Likewise, this landscape shot looks a little dull and lifeless on the 2 cheaper phones, whereas the flagship phone looks sharp, bright and colourful. It's an even bigger difference in low light. Here, the cheap phone shot is unusable, and the difference between it and the flagship phone is huge. This just shows that you get much more camera for your money when you spend a little more. Phone screens typically measure between 4.5 inches and 5.5 inches, but there are some giant 6-inch phones out there too. Smaller phones are easier to use in one hand, while any phone around 5 inches aims to strike a balance between size and usability. Really big phones, like the Nexus 6, need 2 hands to use properly. They're harder to use out and about, but are great for games, films and reading. These phones are often called phablets because they're like a phone and a tablet combined. It's worth trying different sizes to see what you prefer, but another thing you need to understand is resolution. Screen resolution is expressed in a couple of different ways, but the easiest to understand is pixels per inch, or PPI for short. This is simply the number of pixels the screen has divided by the size of the screen. The more pixels per inch, the smaller the pixels are. The smaller the pixels, the sharper the screen appears. A phone with less than 250 ppi can look a little fuzzy and unclear. 350 ppi is a good minimum, as it becomes almost impossible to see the pixels, and anything over 400 is more than enough. Finally, it's helpful to understand the difference in performance between cheaper and more expensive phones. We're not getting into the specifics of processors and RAM here, but the real difference when you're using a phone. Here are 2 phones. The one on the right is a top-of-the-range phone with the latest processor, while the one on the left is a typical cheap but good phone. Here you can see that the pricier phone is slightly snappier when opening menus and apps, but the difference isn't huge. Ultimately, any trusted reviews recommended phone should perform basic tasks fine. Next we'll play a basic game like Fruit Ninja. Once again, there isn't an obvious difference between the 2. If you mainly play simple, free games like this, then you won't gain much from a faster, pricier phone. But you will notice the difference when playing games like Asphalt Overdrive. Not only do graphics on the more expensive phone look better, the gameplay will be smoother with fewer stutters and dropped frames than on the cheaper phone. If you play lots of these kinds of games, it's worth investing in a slightly faster phone.